For USCFootball.com, I'm Jack Smith alongside Connor Morrissette. Triple-double for instant analysis from USC's Wednesday evening practice of Colorado Week. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today, but let's get into your small practice observations first.
Great. Raleek Brown, a lot of talk has been made about him. I can report that he is still working really hard in practice, juking, making a lot of great moves. So he looks as athletic as ever, I can report. And then Micah Banuelos, the freshman offensive lineman, had a good rep today against Eric Gentry. A lot of the linebackers were working on coverage on some running backs and tight ends, and then they were going up against some offensive linemen trying to get to the quarterback in a drill. Just a little bit of the linebacker stuff that we were able to see today. Everyone was out there, and that's really about it. Didn't get a ton to take away as usual, but that's what I got.
Well, Josh Henson talked about reserve offensive linemen that were making strides. Banuelos was not one of those players he mentioned, but he did shout out Elijah Page, Killian O'Connor, as well as Mason Murphy as guys that are running with the twos or further deep. So we'll have more on Henson. There's the full interview if you want to go watch it on YouTube. But we did get to talk to USC's offensive line coach, Josh Henson, today. It was last week, it was Dennis Simmons, so we got Henson this week coming off of an interesting performance by the offensive line where they played really well, but they did have some pre-snap penalties. They did have some, minor gaffes. What did you take away from what Henson had to say today?
I asked him if the plays coming in a little bit late, which I think was obviously happening earlier in the game, affected the offensive line and some of the false starts. And Coach Henson said maybe it was a little bit of that. Maybe it was a little bit of the crowd noise. They didn't have a sense of urgency. Sometimes the play would change, and it would take the offensive line, he said, 10 seconds to get into their sets. So it was a whole bunch of different stuff that contributed to some of those penalties and the slow start for the offense in the game. And he says we're cleaning it all up this week. He talked about how the bye week probably didn't help with that a little bit too. So I think expect a cleaner performance. I think the fact that it's an earlier game too is going to help a little bit. I don't anticipate, of course Colorado's going to be loud, but it's a little bit different when you can get some drinks in the system at night. Arizona, it was a full house. It'll be a full house again against Colorado, but I think the early kickoff will help USC.
I think you're discounting college football fans. I'm not sure that they won't be willing to get drinks in before a 10 a.m. game. But we also got to talk to USC quarterback Caleb Williams. First time we've talked to him one-on-one as an individual media scrum since before the Stanford game. So it's been a couple weeks since we got to talk to the former Heisman Trophy winner. What did you take away from what Williams had to say to the media today?
He was asked about Colorado. He said the hype has been good for them. I would agree. He was asked about competing against Shedeur Sanders. He said he was excited. He said they met in 8th grade at an All-American game. Haven't really kept in touch, but they have met before. He also talked about how besides the first game, he's felt like in every other game this season, the longer USC's gone, the better they've gotten. And we all know their motto, the longer it goes, the better we get. Something like that. I might be butchering it. They've stayed true to that, and that made Caleb Williams really happy.
I think he was asked, too, about, red zone, and that's an area where USC struggled a little bit. How did he think that USC has to improve in order to play better in the red zone than they did against Arizona State?
He said they need to be more consistent, which he's talked about a lot. Everyone talks about consistency on this team, a credit to Lincoln Riley. And then I think what was interesting, maybe he said this before, maybe he hasn't, he said the team that's more physical in the red zone usually wins. So they want to be more physical in the red zone. Physicality is a huge part of things, and they had a couple mistakes against Arizona State in the red zone. That late opportunity when maybe they could have kicked the field goal, elected to go for it. They don't convert. If they're more physical, maybe they do convert in the future.
It's interesting, too. You want to be physical in the red zone, but you also want to make sure you're not making any small errors because one 15-yard penalty, as we saw on that offensive pass interference, can set you back, and then you're forced to kick a field goal. So it's kind of towing that line as well. Another player that talked about Colorado, and I think it's the one that USC fans want to hear from the most on the topic and the one who probably has the most knowledge on Colorado, wide receiver Brendan Rice, who transferred over from the Buffaloes before last season, kind of talked in the media scrum about that. I know you got to talk to him on the Tunnel Vision podcast after the Arizona State game. What were some of your biggest takeaways from what Brendan had to say today?
Today he called Colorado a sleeping giant and that Coach Prime was the one to wake it up, which I thought was true because clearly it is a sleeping giant. I mean, maybe Coach Prime going anywhere would hype up that program, but I think it's been beneficial to both parties. Clearly, that's been great to see. He said he was really excited to come back. He called Boulder a great college town. He's really excited to get back to Folsom Field. He called out the field specifically. So I think the excitement for him is there. He mentioned it when we were on Tunnel Vision. He's really excited. He also said when I asked him about what the team learned being on the road last week that they can apply this week, he said, when we get pushed or punched, we got to fight back. We got to punch back. Be ready to punch back. We're going to take some shots. So I think maybe last week against Arizona State, I don't know if that Fresno State performance on tape maybe lulled the team to sleep a little bit. This is me speculating. Have no idea if that's true or not. I don't think they're going to be lulled to sleep against Colorado. They're going to be ready to go. They're going to be ready to get punched back because they were punched against Arizona State. Maybe it took them a little bit to punch back. Against Colorado, I think they'll be ready quicker.
I didn't get a chance to talk about this on Tunnel Vision because I was not doing the Sunday, the one after the Arizona State game, but I think the game that USC played against Arizona State, while it could raise some concerns, it was a good time for them to have a game like that, not only because you want your starters to be conditioned enough to play 4 quarters, especially because you think this game against Colorado, everyone's circling the matchup, you're probably going to have to play the entirety of the game, not get pulled after the third quarter or the first half like USC had been in its first couple games. Also, you're playing at elevation, so the conditioning really matters, so you're getting a chance for the starters to play the entire game and be fully conditioned. Also, I think if USC had blown out Arizona State like we had expected, they would have been far, I guess, more vulnerable to thinking, hey, we're really good and Colorado just got beat by a lot. And you never really know. Going on the road, that can kind of become a trap situation. Now, I think this game is going to have, a lot of eyes on it, obviously, so USC is going to be focused. They're not going to overlook Colorado, but I think it's a good thing that USC had the game that they did against Arizona State at the time that they did. And, while you can talk about whether the game makes you have concerns about the team, I think it's a good thing that they had that, and now they've got a chance to adjust to it before the Colorado game, because I think they'll really be fully alert trying to improve from that, from the Arizona State game to the Colorado game. But Brendan also talked about Caleb Williams and having that touchdown on the big scramble play. What did you take away from that?
Yeah, the fact that Arizona State defensive backs after the game went up to Brendan Rice and said, great job, man, keep doing really well. And I think sometimes when you go up against Caleb Williams, you can watch it on tape, that's one thing, and then it's another thing, and Brendan Rice fits into this category too, going up against them in real life. So the fact that Rice was so wide open, he said, I don't really know why I was so wide open, you'd have to ask Arizona State. I just took away the fact that I think people, during the game, no one's in awe of anyone, but maybe after the fact that Rice was talking to some of those Arizona State defensive backs and they came up to him and said, nice job, I think playing USC is one thing, or watching USC is one thing, and playing USC is another.
He really walked through basically from the snap to catching the touchdown pass, the entirety of that play. You're going to have to go watch the YouTube video here, the interview, because I don't know football quite as well as Brendan Rice does. He's basically saying, I started on an inside fade, and I was supposed to be the first read, and then this happened, which made me do this, and then made me do this. But basically what he's saying is, as a receiver playing with Caleb Williams, when he bust into that magician scramble mode that basically ends up in a touchdown every time, the receiver is supposed to run to green grass. You're trying to find an area that Caleb maybe is moving towards that's open. You're trying to shake the DB that might be on you, trying to find that open spot. Clearly, Brendan did, as he was more wide open in the end zone than on a design play, and that can happen. But Brendan Rice talked a lot about that. We also get a chance to talk to Justin Dedich about how do you block as an offensive lineman in that regard, and he had some interesting things to say.
And shout out to Jack. He asked $1 million question. Am I going to steal your thunder if I say his answer? Is that okay with you?
Go ahead.
So Jack asked just what it's like to block for a quarterback like that who the play's never over, and Justin Dedich talked about how it's different than any quarterback he's played with before. He mentioned how Keaton Slovis wouldn't take that long. He'd step up and make the throw, and that was different. And now with Caleb Williams, you have to block until you don't block anymore, until maybe the defensive player lets up a little bit. Just the play's never over. I'm mumbling here. That was the big takeaway. Caleb Williams is super special because the play is never over with him, and we saw that on the Rice touchdown.
Yeah, he said, for Keaton Slovis, you block for 4 to 5 seconds, and then the ball's out, so you're done. But he's saying now with Caleb Williams, you have to be ready to block your own guy for up to 10 seconds, or maybe after 2 seconds, you leave that block, go find someone else to block. But he's basically saying, as an offensive lineman, it's fun because you can just say, well, I always just need to be blocking. And he said it's a fun thing. He clearly has, a lot more experience because he's played with Caleb for 2 years. But he's saying, it was something he had to learn because it's different than every quarterback he's played with before. But his key is just, if you're not blocking someone, you're doing something wrong. So as long as Caleb has the ball, you're trying to find a guy to block. And in the game against Stanford, and Shotgun outlined this very well on Twitter, Jarrett Kingston had one play where he blocked 3 different guys, and that's kind of what you need to do as an offensive lineman when you're blocking for Caleb Williams, because you never know how long he's going to have the ball. But that offensive line, and obviously Brendan Rice talking about the chemistry between he and Caleb and what the receivers do, that is one of the reasons that Caleb has been able to be so good on those off-script plays, is because the players around him practice it as well, and they've gotten pretty good at it, especially the ones that have been there for 2 years when you're talking about Justin and Brendan Rice. But did you have any other big takeaways from practice today?
There are definite keys that they work on, like you said, when Caleb scrambles. It's not like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want. That they practice that, which is really interesting. Oh, Kalen Bullock, we spoke with him today too. Dennis Lynch, newly on scholarship, and we asked what his speech was like, because Lincoln Riley said that after Dennis got awarded the scholarship, he did a speech, and Coach Riley talked about how he couldn't really sum up the speech because it was so weird, and Kalen said that Dennis made a joke and no one laughed, and I thought that was pretty funny. That got a lot of yucks. He also said that USC, they weren't expecting a lot of the trick plays from Arizona State, which I thought was interesting because we hear so much about how you're USC, the coaches say you're going to get the other team's best performance. It's tough to prepare for trick plays, obviously. I just thought that was an interesting comment.
Yeah, I asked him straight up, and I wasn't exactly asking that. I was asking more, do you expect to see more of those trick plays going forward because you are USC? And he goes, we did not expect them. And I was like, yeah, not exactly what I was asking, but it's like, yeah, that's what trick plays are designed to do. And, clearly they were caught off guard. I was kind of more curious, and we didn't get to ask follow-up questions because I think that was the last one about, how do you prepare for those going forward, and how do you, be a little bit more prepared, maybe see them coming a little bit more, but that's something we'll have to ask as the season goes on. I think the Dennis Lynch thing, when Lincoln's saying, well, I can't really sum it up because it was so weird, they have been told not to talk about the speech. We were talking with Taj Washington. Chris asked a couple questions about it, and he said, well, can you give us a little bit of detail about what he said? And he's like, I can't do that. I'm sorry. I can't. So clearly they're trying to keep it buttoned up, but so it must have been either really funny, maybe a little inappropriate, but basically everyone has just been saying, well, Dennis is Dennis. So, but congratulations to Dennis Lynch on earning that scholarship, and clearly he is staying himself. I think it was Taj Washington, too, that said, I had no idea he didn't have a scholarship. So Dennis was Dennis, apparently, during the speech. And my guess is that they just didn't want him. They didn't want anyone saying, what he said during that speech.
I'm surprised there hasn't been a video out, not of the speech, but just of him getting the scholarship, because it feels like that's like a freebie, everyone getting excited in the locker room. So maybe that'll come in the future. I don't expect the speech to come out based on everything we've heard, but the moment that he gets awarded the scholarship, I could see that coming in the future.
Yeah, well, the speech might not be coming out, but we'll have articles coming out on the website, uscfootball.com. There's a bunch of different interviews here on YouTube. Connor did a live podcast with Ryan today in the afternoon. Connor and I with Ryan will be live tomorrow night for Tunnel Vision, and then Ryan and Connor and Chris are all heading to Boulder for the game. They'll have They'll have a lot of stuff going on after the game, and then we'll be live on Sunday for post-game Tunnel Vision. So if you want to preview a real in-depth preview of how USC matches up with Colorado and the way Colorado's been playing this season, make sure you're tuning in tomorrow night, 7 p.m. here on the West Coast on Inside Troy here on YouTube for our live Tunnel Vision show, and we'll have all the content that you want throughout the weekend. But anyways, that's all we've got for you guys from Instant Analysis. For Connor Morrissette, I'm Jack Smith. Check out uscfootball.com for more.